That's my Diane Arbus moment, actually. There was bad vibes going on.
Okay, Jill, first of all, congratulations on getting AP's Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm guessing now you've got so many awards you can't remember them all, right?
No, I remember them all. I have a few, but yeah, no, each one is, it's a thumbs up, isn't it? You don't forget them.
Fantastic. So to go back to the beginning, I just wanted to ask if you've been interested in photography before that time in 1965 when you stood outside Paul McCartney's house and you got those pictures. I just wanted to find out if it had always been something you've been interested in.
Yeah, I was interested in photography, I guess, from the youngest possible age, because my dad was an amateur photographer. He was a professional architect, but photography was his hobby.
Right.
And so was playing the guitar.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I combined his two hobbies in my career, not intentionally, obviously, but we had a darkroom at home, so his hobby was shooting pictures of the kids and the dog and stuff for work, his buildings and stuff he was doing for work.
Right.
And then he would let me, my brother, I guess sometimes too, sit in the darkroom on a high stool, and there would be the tray of, liquid, and you go abracadabra when you put the white paper in, and then, the magic would happen, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that must have stuck with me, because I can still see it now, and it still fascinates me to be in a darkroom.
Fantastic. It's obviously quite a big jump from standing outside Paul McCartney's house back in those days, from getting the gig as the in-house photographer at the iconic Rainbow Theatre. Can I just get you to remind us how that basically happened?
Yeah. I was at that time, this is beginning of 1972, I'd done a term at the Central School of Art and Design, and I was in the textile department, doing a degree, and all the students doing degrees in their first year did a 2-week photography course. I was on that.
Okay.
And it coincided with a concert that I was invited to in the middle of at the end of the first week and before the second week.
Who was it?
It was the band Yes.
Yes, fantastic.
Prog rock band. And so by that time I had learnt how to shoot a roll of coloured transparency and get the exposures right. I had done a roll of black and white and learnt to process it and made a contact sheet. And then we got the college camera, another roll of black and white film, another lens, and said, okay, you can have the camera for the weekend. So I took it to the Rainbow Theatre. It was a Pentax, probably, don't know which one, K1000 or something. And the seats that we had were up in the balcony, very high up. And even with my lenses, I couldn't see to do the pictures. But I noticed about a few songs in that there were photographers down in the
pit?
Well, there wasn't a pit that was open that day. It was they were down the front aisle, shooting from there. Maybe Yes were using a cover over. So I don't know what came over me, but I thought, well, if I go down there, and I did, and nobody stopped me. They must have thought I was professional. I had a professional camera.
That's right, I remember you saying.
I shot my one roll of film. I got chatting to 2 professionals at the end, and that led to me being offered the unpaid but very prestigious job of the Rainbow's in-house photographer.
Fantastic. And I remember you said at the time that other photographers were quite supportive. But I was just wondering, did you face much discrimination or sexism?
Well, yes. I mean, yes, and yet there was advantages. So in a way, you can go either way with this. I mean, there were some photographers like Mike Putland, for example, previous winner of your award, I believe. He was incredibly helpful. Told me how to process and what temperature microphone to use and so on. And then there were others that were nameless. One in particular used to sort of elbow me out the way, literally. If I was in his way, he obviously felt more important than I was, so he elbowed me out. And then there were managers and record company people and road crew and all of that stuff to navigate. And that was quite tricky at times. Then there was doormen and security people. That was quite tricky at times. But then there was also advantages there. You know, you could perhaps get in places that maybe a bloke wouldn't be able to get into. But then you'd have to make your escape if they wanted to, come on to you.
Absolutely.
So I think there were plenty of problems, and also the music press was very much a boys' club at that time. That was more difficult than anything else in a way.
That's really interesting, which kind of brings me on to my next thing to ask. In terms of the being given a commission to shoot a gig, obviously back in those days with film, you just had to really work as quickly as possible. In terms of actually honing the art of gig photography, was that quite difficult at the beginning? I mean, obviously with these days on cameras, the kind of ISO performance is absolutely fantastic, but I would imagine back then, dark concert halls, constantly changing lighting, dynamic active bands, it must have been really quite hard, right?
Yeah. Yes, there was no autofocus. There was manual meters. So you kind of had to get a feel on the exposure, and lighting would change just as you were in focus, and then the spotlight would suddenly vanish or whatever it might be. But you had to use like your anticipation.
Right.
And that was something that really made shooting live shots for me like a meditation or something. You know, you'd be so tuned in, so observant, and you just had to be really. And there was obviously a limit to how much film you would shoot, or had. I noticed, there was one photographer, wonderful Barry Wenzel, his name was, from Melody Maker. He used to not come for the first few songs at all. He would come halfway through or something.
Right.
He'd enter the pit, and by that time we would maybe starting to run out of film.
Right.
But he had the roll of film for the encore, which is where the best shots were. So there was all sorts of things like that. So I mean, each frame, you got 36 frames, and then you had to change films.
Yeah.
And if you were shooting colour, it was very low ISO film.
Yeah.
And so was the black and white actually, but you could operate the black and white.
Yeah.
The colour was a bit more tricky. And some early transparencies, if everything was red, it just went all blocky.
Yeah. And in terms of the music press and the commissioning editors, were they reasonably tolerant, or was it quite a sort of dictatorial atmosphere?
Well, Melody Maker was my first barrier, I suppose. That's the first one. I would go there with my bundle of pictures from the Rainbow and leave them on the picture editor's desk and then vanish. And often I'd be quite dispirited when I saw much better ones on the desk, and I thought, well, I won't hang about and chat. But one situation I did have, which was difficult, was when I actually had a cover of Melody Maker with The Who.
Oh, yeah.
Less than a year after I'd started, and I was so thrilled with my cover. It was a good picture, but I didn't get photo credit.
Oh my God.
And I didn't get any photo credits in those days. And so after that cover, I went to see the editor, whose name was Ray Coleman, and he was a bit like a headmaster.
Right.
And he said, I said, can I have a credit, because I've had a cover now, can I start getting credits? And he went, no, you'll get one when you deserve one, or, some sort of headmasterly,
incredible.
That sort of thing. But once punk came about, there was a totally different atmosphere for me. And then it became much easier. And in fact, it went the other way in the late 70s, where we often got more photo credits, bigger photo credits, and the writers got credited.
Really,
and then when the face came along into the 80s, then the photographers were king, and the journalists went down a notch because of.
Interesting.
Yeah. So.
And in terms of the camera equipment, are you still a Pentax shooter at this time, or had you gone on to using different cameras and lenses?
Yeah, I think I was shooting on the Pentax. I had my father's S1A actually, which he brought, and the college one, then my father's one, and then at some point I moved to Nikon FEs, and that was a bit of, they were much better actually, much lighter, faster lenses, more reliable in some ways, and I used those for ages. I went all the way up the Fs for Nikon, right up to the F5,
right,
and then so each time was a bit of a learning curve.
Sure.
Yeah.
And obviously in 1974 you kind of moved into more studio portrait work. Did you find that a fairly seamless transition, or was it quite difficult at the beginning?
I didn't really move into studio work until the 80s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I did move into feature work in 1974. So I started the first few years in the pit. And that was great. Didn't have to speak to anybody and did pictures. Then in 1974, I got given my first kind of journalistic thing, and that was Stevie Wonder, in fact it was, and that was quite nerve-wracking because I wasn't used to speaking to anybody. And then after that, especially during punk, it sort of opened out, the doors opened, and I was doing feature work. And by the late 70s, I was a feature photographer for all the music press.
Right.
And then when the Face came in 1980, they wanted colour and they wanted more like fashiony, more Annie Leibovitz style pictures, and that's when I had to go up another level and learn Hasselblad. And in 1983, late 82, I got my own studio.
I see. I mean, just talking about people like Michael Portland, I mean, at this time, did you ever think about going over to the States?
No, I think I've always thought that I'd be based here, but I've certainly spent quite a lot of time in the States because there was quite a few assignments that ended up with travel in them, and America was one of the places that I spent quite a bit of time. I like it very much.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of towards the end of the 1970s, you built this fantastic reputation for shooting up and coming interesting bands, the Pretenders, Joy Division, etc. Was that a personal choice, or was that very much what the kind of editors of the music papers at that time were kind of asking you to do? Yeah,
I didn't start working with individual bands probably in the 70s. Relationships began in the 70s. I suppose the first band I worked with a lot was Floyd, and that was a commission. But it wasn't a commission from the magazines or newspapers. It was from Hypnosis, from Storm Thorgerson.
Oh yes, yeah.
So that was different because I'd photographed Floyd just, at the Rainbow. Then I photographed Floyd backstage somewhere. I'd managed to get in, blag my way in. Then they started to buy the odd picture from me. Then I took my work to see Storm Thorgerson and Hypnosis, and then they put me on the Dark Side of the Moon tour. And so my relationship with Pink Floyd went on and on and on and on.
Okay.
Then with Chrissie Hynde, I met her in the 100 Club in the 70s, before she had a band, for example. And then over the years, I sort of kept bumping into her, but these were magazine commissions. Oh, hello again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that would happen with other bands as well. Madness is another one. I've got certain parts of my archive that have got very extensive work on certain artists, and then gaps where there's nothing. So in the case of I've got a Madness, Chrissie Hynde and the Pretenders, certainly Pink Floyd. I'm just trying to think of the 70s. On the Police, I was there at the very beginning, another one. And then, my great joy and passion for Oasis was in the 90s, when I'd been through everything, and that was like my bonus. Actually, it was sort of like they were my Beatles.
Fantastic. In terms of the kind of studio-based portrait work that you kind of did for publications such as The Face, in terms of studio lighting, did you try and keep it as simple and as spontaneous as possible, or did you go for quite complicated arrangements?
I've never been hugely confident that I'm, a brilliant studio photographer, but I absolutely mastered the basics of it.
Right.
Initially in a camera club, actually, where you all join and photograph a girl scantily clad in a nightie and stuff or whatever.
I haven't ever done stuff like that.
I did that first, just to learn.
I'll have to take your word for that.
just to learn how to use a flash properly.
Right.
But when I got my own studio, I'd already done several shoots. I realised at some point that I had the work, but I didn't know how to use the studio equipment. And then an advertising photographer said to me, use my studio and my assistant. You've got the jobs.
Right.
And that's how I learnt how to use the studio.
Oh, I see.
And so I copied like beauty lights set up from a photographer in the next studio. And I saw how he was lighting it. I mean, I wasn't trained, you see, I'm not a trained photographer.
Yeah.
So I'm an amateur photographer that's, practiced a lot. But I did get to the point by the, 90s where I was pretty competent at lighting and also building sets and doing more conceptual work, which I would never have dreamt of. But I always keep a 35mm handy.
Yeah.
Sometimes a Leica, because I use that a lot. Sometimes because I'm still a photojournalist.
Right.
And so Paul Weller, for example, I did shots of him for the face cover. But my favourite shots of him from that shoot are just the snaps I took while he was getting ready for the shoot.
Okay. In terms of portraiture, I've interviewed rock photographers who've spoken about people like Richard Avedon and people such as that being an influence. I just wondered if any portrait photographers in particular, kind of outside of this particular speciality, had been an influence on you.
Yes, in a word. And the one I most think of is Irving Penn.
Okay.
I had his book Worlds in a Small Room, where he'd travelled everywhere with background and some lighting. He'd been travelling, making studio portraits. That, to me, that was absolutely a revelation. And I found the book, I still got it, and its pages are falling out because I used to keep it and, it was my guide. Later then, Richard Avedon and actually Diane Arbus, who wasn't a studio photographer but shot with lighting and those kind of people. So yes, I would say Irving Penn was my number one.
That's really interesting. Okay, and coming into the 90s, it's obviously time to talk about Oasis. Was the band familiar with your photography before? Because I understand Noel in particular has got a great sense of, rock and roll kind of history,
Yes, that was my calling card in a way, was my, he knew of my work and so did the people at Creation Records.
Right.
Because I was about 40, I think, when I started working with Oasis, And so I had a whole body of work behind me and I'd photographed bands that they loved, whether it was the punk bands, or Floyd, or the Police, in fact. I mean, they were all, I hadn't actually photographed the Beatles, but I had photographed George Harrison and Ringo, and individually,
Back in 1965, you shot Paul McCartney.
I did shoot Paul McCartney, but I'd shot him subsequent to there as well.
Oh, okay.
I just never photographed John Lennon, so I couldn't reminisce about John Lennon to them. But other than that, I had a pedigree.
Yeah.
And they were happy with that, I think.
Fantastic. I mean, kind of Oasis had a bit of a reputation back in the day. I mean, even in comparison to some of the interesting and colourful characters you photographed in the 70s. In terms of being out with the band, did you find that quite difficult, quite tiring?
I had a lovely time with Oasis. I just loved it. I was somewhere between a very, quite an older sister and a mum to them. And also they liked working with women. That was the key.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah, they had a female tour manager who was just fantastic, and she ruled. Maggie.
Right.
She was the boss. She was young. Then they had very women in senior places in the management. They had a female truck driver who drove Arctic truck, actually, that she intrigued me. And I think their PR, Johnny Hopkins, he thought that I might be able to work quite well with them because they were quite volatile.
Yeah.
But, you know, their mother Peggy was, you know, a very important matriarchal figure.
Yeah.
You know, they loved her dearly and they respected her. And so actually I got a lot of, what's the word for it? Made it much easier being female.
That's really interesting. And in terms of getting photographs of Noel and Liam together, I mean, it's obviously pretty common knowledge that their relationship has often been difficult and continues to be. Was that sometimes hard in terms of actually photographing them as a pair?
This is where the Diane Arbus came in, really. I mean, to me, I liked her work because she photographed slightly dysfunctional families. And, yeah, I suppose, I mean, to me, actually, they were a functional family, but they were, they were a family.
Yeah.
And they're brothers, and so the fact that they didn't get on I wasn't fazed by it particularly. It was just, within the spectrum of family relationships, it was just something to be managed, really.
Okay. By this time, it was obviously transitioning from analogue photography to digital. How did you find that? I remember last time I interviewed you, a long time ago, you said something about you photograph one of Oasis's biggest gigs and you'd accidentally set the picture to low resolution JPEG.
Yeah.
I mean, was that a kind of isolated incident at the beginning of the whole digital thing, or did you find the whole process sort of a bit hard?
Oh, I found the process dreadful, actually. I didn't know what to do, really. I'd had no problem with Photoshop, embraced it from the start. I had no problem with digital printing. In fact, I thought it was incredible. But the cameras, I'm afraid, I really had a learning curve. I had even a learning curve between, the Nikon F4 and the Nikon F5 was already traumatic for me. But going digital, I just thought, I'm not sure if I can do this.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and then I just had to. And you'd reminded me of that awful moment where I'd done all these great shots and they were like 500K or something, wide open or something, I think but to be fair, somebody'd set the camera up for me and it set it, and I think I was sabotaged by the NME people at the time, or whoever it was that set it up. And thereafter I had to learn, I just had to. I went for Canon though, because at the time that I decided I had to do it, there was a waiting list for digital Nikons, the new one, and I couldn't wait. So I thought, okay, well then I'll have a Canon.
Yeah.
And so I've used Canons since then. But I'm now having a learning curve with this new camera I've got. Is it the R5 or something? The mirrorless Canon. I don't know how to use it. I have to go and look at tutorials and hope that a genius will come and sit with me.
I'm sure they will. Let's talk about another massive towering figure in your career, namely Bob Dylan. I understand you'd been trying to photograph him for quite a long time before it actually happened. And I'm just wondering how you felt to sort of finally shoot the guy face to face.
I think you may have the story slightly wrong there, because I actually didn't have any interest in Bob Dylan, really.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't a fan in the 60s or 70s particularly. I'd only seen one show of his, which was very bad, and I was there as a punter. So I didn't have great interest, although obviously I thought his songs were incredible, and especially if somebody else did them. So I wasn't. But when Time Out of Mind happened in 1998, it just hit me in the solar plexus. I just thought that I became a very strong fan at that point, and I thought, this is the time to pursue him. Now, I'd previously, in 1985, had one encounter with him.
Right.
Where he'd been at like a promo gig for Fergal Sharkey, and Dave Stewart was there, who was a friend of Bob's, and they were sitting together in a kind of the gloom. And I went up to Dave, who I'd worked with before, and I said to both of them, I said, "Can I take a picture with a flash?" You know, and Dylan answered, and he went, "Just one." And then he turned his head like that. But it's a great shot anyway. And that was my encounter with Dylan. But in 1998, I met him at Glastonbury.
Right.
Through an Oasis security man who walked me into the right area, and you know, that kind of. And I met him and chatted to him, and he invited me to come on stage, and I took some pictures of him at Glastonbury.
Okay.
Which nobody else was allowed to do.
No.
And from then on, and then he rang me up, Bob Dylan did, and said he liked the picture and he liked this and that, and he'd seen my Oasis book, he liked that, and he said I said, "Oh, well, I could do that for you, and I'd love to, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Oh, you can photograph me whenever you like." And then I couldn't get back to him to organise it. And his management was sort of very nice, but very sort of, "Oh, Bob says not right now, Bob says this."
Yeah.
And in the end, I thought, well, he said I can photograph him whenever I like, so I will.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Right.
You know, pursuing him a bit.
Right, I see.
And until I re-met him, and he said, "No, I've got my own photographer now." And I said, "Okay, I won't darken your door anymore, Bob."
He's a character, isn't he?
I had a great time with him as well. It was wonderful.
So, setting up Rock Archive, can I just ask the timing of actually setting it up, exactly when you did? I mean, was there any particular reason? Is it because you'd just done this incredible body of work with Oasis and just fancy doing something else?
That was the Bob quest, really. Something else was, but no, with Rock Archive, I'd done a big exhibition of Oasis in the Roundhouse. It was there then, it was called, in 1998, on the cusp of the digital revolution. And it was sponsored by Epsom, who had a new printer, and Olympus, who had a consumer camera that was really nice. It was sponsored by Adidas, and everybody wanted to get involved in Oasis.
Of course,
so I had a lot of sponsorship, and I had a website, which was very early days in 1997, 98. So after that, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if next time I do a big exhibition, if it was not just Oasis, but it was like a more general one. And then I thought, well, I'll think of a website name, and I thought Rock Archive would be good, Rock Archive. And then when I started it, I thought, well, we've got all these printers and things left from the exhibition. We could make prints. Why don't I invite some friend photographers to join me, and we'll each put in like 5 pictures, and we'll be like an archive of archives.
I see.
And I thought eventually, soon, there's bound to be a rock and roll museum somewhere, and then it'll be great for that.
Yeah.
But here we are, 25 years later, and there's no rock and roll museum.
No.
And Rock Archive, which has only ever been, what can I say? It was set up as if there was a museum. We curate exhibitions, we sell prints, but it's not particularly profitable company. It's sort of a shoestring company, actually, sort of run by enthusiasts, me and a little team.
Right. If I can just interrupt there, that's quite interesting, considering the demand for archive images of great rock and roll bands. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't kind of expanded more. You know?
Well, we're not a photo agency. We only make prints.
Okay.
You see, so the artists, the photographers have all got their own agencies. They've got their own distribution. So all we are is printmakers, really, and curators. We don't actually do anything other than that, except I also filmed photographers, because I'm fascinated by photographers, and I did little documentaries on my favourite ones for Rock Archive, which are also a body of work. I mean, it's kind of like our exhibitions that we've curated have all been very innovative, and also we've gone into places where libraries like the Manchester Central Library and the Barbican Library, and opened up these spaces to huge crowds.
Yeah.
This exhibition, which was in Manchester, had about 25,000 visitors.
Wow.
And I realised with Chalky Davis, who's not in our archive, did an exhibition of his work about 5 years ago in Wales. That was supposed to tour around. It had about 41,000 visitors, and there was nowhere for it to go.
Right.
And it was decanted, and Dean Chalkley, another one who's had great exhibitions, nowhere for them to go.
Nowhere for them to go.
Unless you pay for it yourself. And so I've campaigned for, you know, not just a photography place that's decent, but a rock photography, or, you know, at least a rock and roll museum with a rock photography section in it.
Right. Just going back to shooting films, obviously you did a video for Oasis. I was just wanting to find out if that's an area you're still kind of interested in, or are you kind of happy being best remembered as a stills photographer?
I think I'm a stills person, really. I did a couple of videos, and I also worked as a stills photographer on films to see. I did it because at one point I thought, well, I'll have to go the video route like Anton Corbijn or something. I'll have to do that. And I thought, well, how am I going to learn that? I thought, well, if I'm a stills photographer on a movie, I'll learn, which I did. I worked on all Christopher Hampton's films in the early days and so on. And at the end of it, I thought, I don't think I am going to do directing, because I don't like crowds of people going, what should we do now? And really, my best work is on a one-to-one basis. So I think I'm happy to sort of be known as a stills person, although I do, you know, joiner images like that, which are like little films in Photoshop, and I do more than just take stills. I use stills sometimes to paint images with, and I'm very keen on films, and I recommend to students to learn how to use the film side.
Good stuff. I've actually got a really good friend who's an extremely talented band photographer. She does gigs and she does studio work, but it's really difficult for her to turn it into a sort of permanent full-time job. I was just wondering if you got any tips or advice for people such as her when it comes to actually turning it into a full-time job, because obviously it's difficult, isn't it, these days?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to earn your living as a photographer. I don't know what the figures must be now for how many people make a living out of being professional photographers as to how many made a living out of being professional photographers pre-digital. But I should think the numbers have dropped. I would think so. I might be wrong, I don't know, because there used to be a lot of ways to make a living from photography, and they're less now. I mean, a proper living. As far as I can see, anyway, certainly within the press, because you used to be able to make a living as a press photographer. But I know press photographers now, and it's pretty tough for them.
It's difficult for them.
There's not really a way, I think, for many people, hardly at all, to make money as a music photographer.
As a music photographer, yeah.
So, I mean, again, if people ask me that question, I just say, look, be a good photographer or an all-rounder. And even for me, there were periods in the 80s when I had 4 portfolios. You know, one was industrial photography, one was portraits, one was fashion, one was because I even won, in the 90s, I won a gardening photographer award, which I was very thrilled about. And people said to me, how long have you been a gardening photographer for? And I said, well, I'm not, you know. So just be a good photographer, you know, but making a living out of it. What separates the amateur photographers from the professionals is whether you can make a living from it.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of technology, artificial intelligence, AI, are you concerned that bands and artists and record companies will start to actually generate their kind of own images, kind of almost bypassing the kind of the sort of standard conventional photographer?
I'm not in the least concerned. No, not really. Perhaps I should be. Maybe there's something there but I haven't seen anything yet that gives me cause for concern. And maybe, anyway, we've got to just go with the flow, really. I mean, when I think about how far it's come since I started with just, you know, a little Instamatic and a 126 film, and going through that whole film business to the digital side, it's not really a surprise that it's moving on a couple of decades later into something else. These are all ways of making images, and you can use it brilliantly, or you can use it kind of in a perfunctory way, or personally, it wouldn't bother me. In fact, I'd be happy to learn about it and see if I can't play with it a bit myself.
Fantastic. Can I ask which cameras and lenses you're currently using the most and why?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm using this a lot. This is
Which is a
Leica M10P.
A Leica M10P.
Yeah,
wow.
this is because I like Sarah Lee's work so much in The Guardian. Become such an admirer of her beautiful pictures on the Leica. I was using a film Leica and I stopped using film. This is a digital version. Right. And I just love using it. It slows me right down. It's very difficult to use. It's irritating and I get things wrong all the time, and that's why I like it. It just sends me back to the beginning.
Fantastic.
Although it's not film. So that's what I'm using, and I use it with a 50mm 1.4 lens. This one's a 35, but I use it with that. And I've got this R5, which I have to use because I have to move on. I photograph bands and foxes and all sorts of moving things and need long lenses, and this won't do it.
Right.
And I don't know how to use it yet, but I'm trying, and I have used it, but with some nervousness.
It's an absolutely fantastic exhibition. There's just such diversity from so many different periods. I was just wondering if I could just ask you to talk about particular favourite images or any images with a particularly good story.
I mean, that's a very difficult question. So don't thank you for asking that one.
That's the reason I asked it.
Okay. Got me there. Okay, so I'll have to think of an Oasis picture, definitely, as one. I'll think of that in a minute. Okay, so there is a picture of Chrissie Hynde in a cage with my little daughter who was a baby. And I'm very pleased with that one because aside from the sentimental value of my darling daughter in there, I think I got the lighting beautifully and sort of got Chrissie to do stuff that she wouldn't normally do, although she was very keen on the subject, which was living without cruelty. So yeah, that would be one. Charlie Watts just has to come with me to the Desert Island. No, we're not on Desert Island discs, are we? Into my personal gallery of all favourites. Charlie Watts, for him personally, he was just a wonderful man, and for the fact that picture won a Jane Bowen Award. And also I thought it was a good picture, and the magazine had only used it on the contents page like that.
Really? If I can ask out of interest, is he the only member of the Stones you've actually photographed?
No, I photographed Mick. I photographed the band.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I have photographed them. I haven't had. They're not one of my bands.
No.
They're Dave Hogan's band, actually.
Yeah.
He's done a lot with them. But Charlie Watts, I became friendly with after I won the award, and wonderful man. So Charlie Watts, Amy Winehouse, because of how fast that shoot was, how lovely she was, and also because it meant so much to her family and to her.
Yeah, of course.
That picture and that gig. So, and she's such a great artist. I think it may have to be 5 then, because I've got to have an Oasis one. So, Oasis, yeah, I'll take that one of Oasis actually. That's a Paris shot. That's my Diane Arbus moment actually, because that's a kind of there was bad vibes going on, but I kept going with the pictures, and I mean the session could have just petered out, but I was going, no, don't worry about it, look, let's keep shooting, and just keeping it moving really. And I love that picture, the way their heads are touching in about 3 or 4 places, but they're not actually touching, they're almost touching. Love that picture, love that moment. And then I've got to have Bob Dylan with me as well, haven't I? And there's only one Bob Dylan here, and it's not even that great a picture, but it means a lot to me, so I'll take that as well.
Good stuff. It's been an absolute delight to interview you, Jill, and congratulations again on receiving our Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh, thanks, it's an honour.
Just to finish off, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.